Judith, we've got to work on our timing. You were meant to, in verse 6, you were meant to turn on the great light that was brilliantly shining in here. Next time we'll get that one right, but it was so close. It was so close. So appreciate that. Hey, look, it's brilliant to join you here. Can I just at the outset say a huge thank you for your welcome? Some of you, as I said, I've only met a number of you in the fellowship here, but we've felt so warmly welcomed by our dear friends and new friends, and that's meant so much. I don't recommend trying to move internationally in the middle of a pandemic. It's a bit of a tough gig, but thankfully we've found a great home to be part of. And as I said, it's such an honor to wrap up this series on Acts, Life Together, being the church, and to double dip as we get into Fruitfulness Sunday, encouraging you in that. This message, there's a lot of things that I think might be encouraging to you, so I hope it's not too high tech, but the QR code and the little link there at the bottom, the bit.ly link, is if you want the notes and the slides, you can literally just click that and you'll find pretty much everything I'm going to share with a little bit of extra stuff too, if that's helpful to you. I'd say that's particularly for those who are grappling with what it means to stand for justice on their front lines right now. So if that's you, if you are in a conflict situation, then this is something that I think will be helpful for you. And that's my prayer today. Come, Holy Spirit, give us the courage to stand for Christ in our particular context. Now, I feel really at home sharing a message on Fruitfulness Sunday because it dovetails well with my work with LICC, where I direct culture and discipleship. And maybe you've heard through Tracy, I trust, that LICC is all about helping people make a difference wherever you are. Not just when we're gathered together, like 6 red dots in the corner of a largely secular society, representing the number of Christians in our culture at the moment. But we want to see you become passionate, fired up red dots who spread out across your front lines throughout the whole week. That's really what our call is. So I'm wondering, what is your particular front line? Now, front line might sound like a military term. It takes on a different meaning when we've seen the events in Afghanistan this last week. But frontline captures that we are each in a spiritual battle. It might look like you're every day, but there is actually a battle going on in this place, in the heavenly realm, in those activities and the places where you spend your time with those who don't follow Jesus. Now, this could be, I've put up here a list of different ways that you might look at frontline, but it could be, for instance, where you live. It might be where you go to school, where you learn. Perhaps it's your 9-to-5 workplace, so you might be thinking of that during this message. It could also be the tennis club, for instance, where you play, or the gym where you go to. Maybe it's the Eden Centre where you shop, and you, like we have done many times, spend a lot of time in op shops during this season. Or perhaps it could be an Extinction Rebellion, I'm getting edgier here, but an Extinction Rebellion rally where you serve. Maybe not. But in all of these places, we need courage. We need courage to bear witness, to speak truth, to stand for justice, and to point people to Jesus as the Lord of all creation. They're the 3 things we're going to look at throughout this message. Now, the problem with preaching as a relative stranger is I don't actually know your stories. Ideally, I would fill this message with all of your stories, and that's how I prefer to do things, but I'm still to get out and actually have some conversations, hanging out for that. And Fruitfulness Sunday is all about drawing out your stories of how to flourish in these everyday places. So here's the plan. Hopefully you're okay with it. I'm going to natter on for about 20 minutes, and I'm going to talk about how to be fruitful, and I'm going to tell a few examples of what that could look like today. But then it's going to be over to you. If we're going to talk about having the courage to share out there, then we need to start with the courage to share with each other in here. And I'm a firm believer that the way you're equipped for out there is by practicing those same things in here. So while it may encourage you to hear me talk about it, you don't actually grow unless we talk with each other about it. Is that okay? So what we're going to do is, after I've shared for 20 minutes, we're actually going to break into probably triplets, maybe with strangers, maybe with friends, and we're going to have 15 minutes where I'm going to prime you with a few questions, and it's going to be storytelling time when you can talk to each other, share what this looks like in your everyday, which is what I would love to bring to you as your stories, but I think we need to share those stories to encourage each other, so we'll be people of courage. So hopefully that sounds okay. That's the plan. So let me get into this. Now, I'm pretty sure that Tracy, especially given that she worked for LICC for so long, I'm pretty sure that she's introduced you to this before, right? The 6 tantalizing flavors of fruitfulness that it comes in. And Simon recently spoke from Acts 17, and he covered M6, which is how to be a messenger of the gospel. So I don't want to, revisit territory. He did it so well, so let's just count that one as done here. But I want to say that being a messenger of the gospel is a really good fruit if it's in a fruit salad. Okay, if it's just by itself, it's kind of like eating bananas and nothing else. Like you'd be like, they're good and all, but I want the whole package. So I want a fruit salad that includes modeling godly character, making good work, being a minister of grace and love, of molding the culture around you, and being a mouthpiece for truth and justice. So if you're starting to think, that passage, Acts 22, where's that going to land? Well, you probably already guessed that I'm going to look at M5, being a mouthpiece for truth and justice. This is absolutely what's happening here. Paul's come back into Jerusalem from traveling around Ephesus and Caesarea, and basically he comes back in. He's involved in trying to show that he's still on their side in the sense of he pays for the purification rites of 4 guys, and then they nab him as he come outside the temple. Now, when I say nab, I mean that it took a Roman tribune with 1,000 soldiers to quell the crowd. So this is not a pleasant speech. It's a lynch mob. So he's been dragged out. They shut the door of the temple, and he is dragged before them, and they're going to kill him. And the Roman tribune comes in, and they protect him, and he could have walked away, but instead he says, let me speak to the mass. Let me speak to the crowd. You want to talk about courage? I would have fled at that point. I would have been, thank you, Romans. I normally don't like you, but I'm really glad to see you today. But that's not what happened. So we see this kind of mouthpiece for truth and justice. And Paul, he lays bare his people's racism. You may not have read this passage in that light, but that's what he does. It's the call to the Gentiles that absolutely blows up here. They're ethnocentric in this point. He lays their racism bare, and he speaks truth to power. But you see, he can only do this, he can only be a witness to God's justice when his life looks like the kingdom he proclaims. So what we need is also M1. He must model godly character. He must practice courage as a cardinal virtue so that his people take his witness seriously. And this is a whole life witness. The whole Bible is a story of God choosing a particular people who see his goodness, and then they grow up in his image, in character. And then they are equipped to testify faithfully to what they've seen, even if it costs their very lives. So our witness and our words must go together. So, to use a little bit of Hebrew, a bit of Greek, Eid, which is the witness, they bear ood. That's the testimony. Eid bears the ood, or in Greek, the martus bears martureo. In other words, they go hand in glove. So if I put this another way, the courage to bear witness requires a godly person bearing divine propositions. It's an apologist with an apologetic. To use the Old English, it's troth, being trustworthy, bearing truth. So modeling godly character must travel together with a kingdom claim as a mouthpiece for truth and justice if we're to be fruitful in our front lines. Who brings the message matters. Crucial. So let's actually get into Acts 22 itself. Hopefully you do have a Bible on hand. I'll be bouncing around a little bit from 21 to 22, but do have that there. And Tracy's brought the oldest, most loved version in the world, so hopefully you've got something like that. It's brilliant. So what are we going to learn from Paul about how to speak truth in love, how to speak truth to power in pursuit of justice, and how to testify to Jesus as the truth itself, personified? Especially when we do this in a world where so many people have their ears plugged and don't want to hear. Now, you might remember from last month, Chris, in one of his last messages here, he gave us the acronym. I think he said it was a snake with a lisp. ILIS. If you can remember, ILIS. I actually thought it was brilliant, and I got a lot out of that. And he talked about how to deal with disagreement using this acronym. But I want to give you a different acronym for today, because what happens when the situation is not just disagreement, but when it totally breaks down? What do you do then? How do you confront injustice with people who are stuck in prejudice. And I think for that, we're going to need something more. We're going to need a lot of faith. So that's the acronym. I have shoehorned it a little bit, but I think it still works. You can be the judge. But what we need is we need to face the issue. We need to aim at the good. We need to identify with the other. We need to tell a better story that's centered on Jesus. And we need to hear God's call amidst the conflict. I'm going to unpack all 5 of these. So, and again, if you're after a bit more, just jump into the notes there. So the first one, face. Like Paul, we need to face the issue squarely and prayerfully lean into the conflict. Did you realize that all of this mess was avoidable? Did you realize that? Paul could have avoided all of this mess. He didn't have to go to Jerusalem. Matter of fact, Acts 21 tells how Agabus and the others back in Caesarea warned of Paul being bound in Jerusalem and handed over to the Gentiles. And from one perspective, Paul seems like a reckless adrenaline junkie for Jesus. I mean, he just goes straight into the fire. What are you doing? You were warned. Why are you going there? But the truth is, though, that right from Paul's Damascus Road experience, the Lord told him how much he must suffer. Right from the outset. That each of us as witnesses will die 1,000 tiny deaths, whether that's symbolically or actually as a martyr. You might notice the word for witness is martyr. It originally just meant to testify, but so many people in their testifying lost their lives that this word became identified with someone who is literally killed for their faith. That's how much it cost the early church. And amazingly, through this martyrdom, the gospel will spread. Now, Luke wrote both the Gospel of Luke, you may be surprised, and he also wrote Acts. And we see in Luke 9:51 this passage that's a hinge in the gospel where Jesus turns his face resolutely towards Jerusalem. And then Luke in Acts 19:21 uses a parallel phrase and said that Paul resolves in the Spirit to go to Jerusalem. He's walking in his master's footsteps. God told him, you must go. Matter of fact, he had a vision a bit earlier on in Acts 18:9, and God said to him, do not be afraid. Keep on speaking. Do not be silent, for I am with you. Emmanuel. And the point here is that through prayer, Paul was compelled by the Spirit to head to Jerusalem. The warnings weren't to say, don't go. That was the interpretation of the people carrying the warning. The warning was to say, this is what's going to happen. Ready your spirit. And Paul knew that he had to go. He knew that his call and his identity was bound up with testifying to the good news of God's grace. And the same goes for us. When the Lord leads, you must face the fire. So on your front line, what conflict is God calling you to lean into? Which opponents would he have you face? Just last week, I was in Cheltenham, and I was literally sharing dinner with a spy. True story. Hannah, I can reveal her first name. She works for the GCHQ in the aptly named Donut. Brilliant building. Now, while she couldn't tell me the operational details, because she would have had to kill me, it was clear how much her character mattered in the face of global terrorism every single day. I love this quote from C.S. Lewis. He said that courage is not just one of many virtues. Courage is the form of every virtue at its point of testing. Do you really love? Well, let's put it to the point of test. That's going to look like courage. Or I could put it differently, that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is doing it afraid. And Hannah did it afraid time and time again, just in her job. And maybe you've seen the movie Official Secrets. I have. Good friends, thanks. It was a good watch. But like this true story, Hannah was also keenly aware that though she had sworn onto following certain guidelines and keeps that in her everyday life and is not conflicted, but she's also keenly aware that there could come a time that following Christ and loving her country may require her to be a whistleblower, a loyal critic who disarms deception that perhaps justifies leading us into battle or tempts us to flee a battle when it's going to cost us. And it's going to look different on your front line, but that is our calling too, to face. So that's the first one, right? What does this look like in your front line? Second one is we are called to aim at justice for all, not just us. It's really tempting today for Christians to push their weight around in culture wars, even in the UK, and to work as a voting bloc to preserve our privilege to proselytise or to dominate a discussion. And we are really quick to cry persecution, to use the word Christianophobia, and then to turn around and sue the people who offended us. But this is not Paul's shtick. Paul bends over backwards to avoid unnecessary offence and to truly love his neighbours. In Acts 21, he actually pays for the purification rites of these 4 devoted Israelites. He showed respect for their customs even when he felt they were redundant in light of Christ becoming the temple through which heaven comes to earth. Paul wants everyone to flourish. He doesn't want anyone to be unfairly privileged or persecuted. And we should too. I saw this in my doctoral defence. In state school education, most Christians were fighting to preserve their control of religious education. It was almost seen as a free pass for indoctrination in state schools. But my supervisor challenged me to consider what makes for healthy education in every subject, not just the advance of Christian concerns. So I went into my doctoral defence with my wife Nikki outside, praying like crazy because we had a sense that this was actually a spiritual battle. Praying like crazy for courage and tact that I could speak truth to power. And sure enough, after my presentation, apparently no one felt the need to read the 50-page document backing it and just came in with their prejudice as to what they expected me to say because they knew that I was coming out as an evangelical in a secular educational institution. I had my panel, including the chair of the panel, thankfully not my own supervisor, basically accuse me of trying to take over education and force faith on the unwilling. This was in my defence. It wasn't pleasant. But what was interesting is that I'd actually built my whole project around the common good of all, not just us. I proved that we needed to learn from a range of religious and secular worldviews to be able to live well together amidst our competing beliefs. And just as Christians shouldn't take over, nor should secularists shut out religious voices as though that's somehow neutral. Praise God, once they saw that my goal was reciprocity and justice for all, not just us, my thesis was passed. So my question is, what about you? How might your courage to bear witness aim at the common good rather than preserving privilege for the select few? That's always our call, and that's a tricky one to get right as followers of Jesus, especially in a pluralistic public square. So that's the first two. We need to face and we need to aim. But third, in faith, we need to identify. We've got to identify with our opponents. Don't just see them as an enemy, but identify, be in their shoes, empathy. We've got to learn to speak their language with great tact and wisdom so that truth can be understood. Now, in Paul's desire to point people to Jesus, he became all things to all people. And for these hyper-religious Jews, he spoke in their sacred Hebrew tongue. He still identified as a Jew. He empathetically gave all of the markers to show that he got them. His study under Gamaliel as their most senior teacher, his zealous keeping of the law, his association with righteous people like Ananias. His message, as ours should be, was context specific. He was trying to maximize the chance that they would get it and turn towards justice. There was no othering. He stood with them. It reminds me of a friend of mine, Cara Martin. She worked in communications for a mining company, and her marketing manager required her to plant a false story in the newspapers to boost the perceived value of their stocks as they negotiated a deal with a Chinese company. Not the situation you want to be in. And this was obviously unjust. So how might she speak truth to power, and could she possibly keep her job in the process? So Cara knew this was a desperate situation. She rallied others around her in prayer, as we should always do. And that night, thank you God, a plan emerged. The next day, she offered her manager's boss the tools to pen the media release for himself. But she said that she couldn't in good conscience write the story. But then she courageously warned them of the consequences for their whole company if this ever got out that they'd lied. Risk management and avoiding reputational fallout was their language, and Kara spoke it fluently. Consequently, it has a happy ending in this particular story, though it didn't for Paul, so it's not always going to lead to getting off the hook. But consequently, the story wasn't printed, and she wasn't asked to be unethical again. So what does it look like on your front line to identify with your detractors and to land the truth in a way that they can receive? How do they speak? How do they frame? How do they think? So you're doing well. That's 3 down, right? We've got 2 to go here, 2 to go. So fourth, it is time to tell. I love this painting from Caravaggio. If there's any art fans, just amazing. You can see the colours and his eyes are blinded and he's come off the horse. Like Paul, how might we build our apologetic, our defense, as a story that is centered on Jesus, who is the Lord of justice and truth in the flesh? Now, across the whole of Acts, you're probably aware, most of us have read the book of Acts, he tells his conversion story 3 times. He loves this story. He loves to tell his story. But this time he tweaks it a little bit. You can tell all the Jewish language it is trying to introduce, but the key thing is he highlights the objectivity of this encounter with Jesus. Even more glorious than Judith turning on the lights is this glorious light at midday. It's not a mere psychological experience. This light exposes and lays bare that they, like he, were blind guides. They were unable to see, and before they could be witnesses, they had to have the scales removed. That's what he's telling him here. Storytelling was Paul's stock and trade. Storytelling was his way of unveiling or revealing the truth and testifying to Jesus, who is the Lord they're persecuting. You see, it's not actually about Paul and his story. His story is a tool. What it's about is humbly falling before Christ as though dead, so we can be remade and resurrected to walk in the way of the kingdom. That's what his story is about. You see, they got the wrong story, and I think sometimes in the church we have too. They thought that their election, being chosen by God, they thought their election was about God playing favorites. But Paul reframes everything. He shows that they were chosen to bless the world and invite everyone outside of this building into a family where God is the Lord of all. It was for this reason that Paul was called, and the same goes for us today. I love what it says in 1 Peter 2:9. It says, "But you, all of us, you are a chosen people. You are a royal priesthood. You are God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful, his brilliant, his glorious doxa, into his light." That's us. That's what we're called for. Now, you might be thinking, you told some big stories here, but I'm retired. I've finished my active working life. What does this look like in my everyday? Let me give you an example of this. And, you've got to honour your mum. So I thought I'd use my mum as an example. Now, my mum is no social justice warrior. Not at all. But she serves as a volunteer teaching English as a second language in a school for refugees. This is back in Australia. And she doesn't do it to be kind of, I'm justicey, or there's no virtue signaling. She just cares for these people and gets to know them. She says, their weddings and, has food and just hangs out. She just loves them. But when she discovered that the Australian government was forcibly removing young people who were now settled in this new land, she felt this righteous anger just well up inside. Before I knew it, my rather peaceful, passive mum joined a protest. I don't know where this came from. And she started calling for fairer treatment and due process. She didn't even really know how to use social media. She'd often post baby photos of me for my birthday onto my own page, which is just a no-no. But she took to social media and she started to tell her story on this front line. And she connected this story to Jesus' own identity, born as a vulnerable refugee in the Middle East, becoming a powerful prophet who called us to shelter the stranger. So what does this look like for you? I mean, maybe you're a single mum lobbying for leaders to welcome more Afghani refugees into the UK, God willing, if we can find a way to do that. Or maybe you're an ex-army MP who is crying out against cowardly withdrawal from a terror-ridden country, and you are pricking the conscience of a nation to stand up for justice. Whoever you are, whatever your front line, tell your story. But center it on Jesus as the just one, the glorious one, and the only kind of saviour there is. You've done very well. You've heard me natter on for quite a while. I've only got one left to go. So face the conflict. Aim at the good. Identify with opponents. Tell a Jesus story. And finally, in faith, hear. Hear God's voice amidst the cacophony. Amidst those who are squashed underfoot. Amplify God's heart and help people hear and discern what God desires. Now, however our detractors respond, we are commissioned to interrupt silence. We're called to speak truth to power, but it only happens when we start by being silent, when we bend our ear to God's voice. Now, Paul spoke their language, and you might be surprised at this, but they were actually semi-open to Jesus as Lord. That wasn't what set them off. What they couldn't stomach was the good news being extended to those despised Gentiles, just like the dirty Romans protecting Paul's life right now, the occupiers. All they knew is, we're God's favourite, damn the rest. That was how brutal it was. But out of Paul's silent meditation and his ecstatic vision of Jesus, Paul heard the just one's undeniable heart for unclean outsiders. Go. I will send you far away to the Gentiles. Then it hits the fan. You see, this is enough for his compatriots to squeeze the life out of him like a bug. What about you? Can you hear God's heart for those who can't breathe? Black Lives Matter was confronting, yeah? Really confronting. But George Floyd's suffocation demanded at least 9 minutes silence to hear the Lord's anger against racism. And it was often the artists, imaginatively working on their front line with raw materials, who woke us from our slumber. We had the privilege to go to Bristol last week. That is a rocking city. I really love the graffiti work there. And the M Shed just had some brilliant stuff on the history of graph work, street art. And a lot of this emerges actually from a justice heart. This is the place where the statue of slave trader Edward Colston was cast into the Avon River. And artworks like this one here on the left, called Sold Down the River by black painter Tony Forbes. These kind of artworks and graphs and stencils, they primed everyone to finally say, enough, enough. Out of love for what our city should be, we deserve better heroes, better bronze statues than racist rulers who lined their pockets with ruined lives from a bloody trade. Enough. So on our front lines, how might we help everyone hear that the Lord requires of us to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God? How's God calling you to do that? So I have definitely nattered on long enough. And this day is all about being called to model godly character and be a mouthpiece for truth and justice. And when these two fruit come together, we'll discover the Spirit's power to courageously bear witness right where we are, to speak the truth in love, to speak truth to power in pursuit of justice, and to testify that Jesus is the truth. And later on, Tracy is going to commission you for that task, because we cannot do this apart from the Spirit's empowerment. We just cannot. And for Paul in Acts 22, I don't know if you're aware of this. Can you see on the far left there? I was just reading in the entrance. It's got all the different shields. That shield represents Paul. Why do you think they got two swords there, two Roman swords representing Paul? You probably know the story of how Paul's life finished. Well, Acts 22 was really the beginning of his prolonged courtroom defense, his witness that led him to being a martyr. But truth be told, Paul had already died to himself long ago. and he rose in Christ before Rome's swords ever fell. And we are each called by faith to enter into this same story downstream of Paul, downstream of Jesus, who turned towards Jerusalem. So we're going to spend the next 15 minutes in triplets. And it could be fours, but I just encourage you, let's keep this real. Don't be afraid to share. We're going to be sharing frontline stories. I'd encourage you to start with this. What does it look like to speak truth in love to power on one of your front lines? It could be your workplace. It could be a gym you're involved in. It could be somewhere you volunteer, where you shop, your neighborhood. What does it look like to speak truth in love to power in that context? Share a story, whether it involves you or that you've seen. It could be an example where it's done well or where it's done badly. And then after that, is there an injustice on your front line that you feel God calling you to face in faith? And how might you courageously bear witness in the midst of this conflict? If you find you're finished within the 15 minutes, pray for each other. Pray for each other in the very texture of your front line. But before we do that, I just want to pray for you, and then we're going to go into sharing. Is that cool? Would you join me in prayer? Lord Jesus Christ, you are the just one, the righteous judge, truth in the flesh. Our lives are yours. Would you help us uncover these stories of where we're already fruitful in our front lines? And would you give us the courage to face the fight and to lovingly stand our ground when you call? In your name. Amen. Bless you each. Share with each other, please. Move straight in. Just triplets, join together. The slides will remain up here with the questions so you can refer to them. And again, there's extra notes if that's helpful.